In this next session, we're going to delve a bit more deeply into the theory of play-based learning. We're going to explore the scientific underpinnings and the practical outcomes of play-based learning in ECCE, look at some of the challenges and opportunities for integrating play-based learning into formal education systems, talk about what it will take to operationalise the NEP's recommendations on play-based learning, and also explore what can we learn from different examples around the country, but also internationally, to help enhance our practice. I'm really delighted to introduce our fantastic panel and invite them to join me on the stage. We have Dr. Mahesh Balsekar, who's a consultant paediatrician from the Reliance Foundation Hospital. We have Ms. Anne Van Dam, who's an educator who we heard from this morning, but I will introduce her again, education consultant from the Learning Square. Dr. Shubhra Chatterji, Director of Vikramshila, and Mr. Arjun Sanyal, who leads our ECCE program at the Reliance Foundation. Please come and join me on stage. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Mahesh. We've been talking a lot about the importance of play in child development, but it would be really nice to hear from you in terms of some of them from a medical practitioner's perspective as to why this is so important in terms of child development, cognition, etc. The role that play has in child development.
So if you see how the brain develops, it's like how a house is built. And the building blocks initially, when a baby is born, is the exposure to sight, sound and touch. The subsequent exposure is to the social and emotional connections which the baby forms with the mother. And based on this, subsequently the cognitive abilities develop. And the cognition involves memory, flexibility, and self-control. Now, if you see the way in which this skills develop, it's largely based on the relationship with the mother. And relationship has a complete extension in all these parameters. Now, Vima talked about how the brain develops in terms of the serve and return. And this is the way the brain gets wired. It's not only the serve and return, but the day-to-day activities between the mother and child. The older child, when you read to the child, when you sing to the child, when you play with the child, and the child just observes your day-to-day living. That's how learning takes place. But this is not only fluffy stuff, that it's only play-based and they're just learning and imitating. This has a very solid neurological basis. And the basis is that a newborn has almost 40 billion neurons, a newborn's brain. And this is just a little less than the number of stars in the sky. And when his brain develops, synapses take place. And synapses is connection between the neurons. And almost 1 million synapses take place every day. And by the end of 3 years, a few trillion synapses are taking place. Now the important thing is that the synapses can be both positive and negative. And if you are reinforced with positive inputs, then the positive synapses take place. And if you have only positive synapses, then it is called pruning of the synapses. So the negative connections actually wither away. The sad part is if the negative connections are reinforced, then they bloom, and the positive connections of brain wither away. So this is again called pruning. So the important thing is that these connections have to be positive. And this has a neurological basis in terms of not only the synapses, but the protein synthesis takes place in the cells of the neuron. And this protein synthesis alters your behavior subsequently. In fact, what's very intriguing is that even if you have a genetic propensity to a certain type of behavior or a mental illness, if you have positive connections, then this is called gene-regulating proteins. So the new proteins form, which actually overcome the tendency of the genes. So this is not only behavior, but it's also neurological. So this is a very, very important aspect. When you do MRI studies of brains who have positive impact, you can actually see that the brain growth in the emotional areas and the cognitive areas goes up. So through the brain network, through the interaction with the mother, you actually get biological and neurological changes in the baby's brain.
So, Dr. Mahesh, I'm going to throw an extra question in there because I think what you've said is so fascinating. What more can we do? It's such a crucial period of time, as you've explained. What more can we do to help parents, mothers, fathers understand the science behind play-based learning and child development, so that they really know the value of really investing in this?
I think most parents want to do the best for their child, but they are unable to do so for various reasons. So, for example, earlier, it's almost in 1965 that the American President Johnson, he started a program called Bright Start, and this was to help children learn better when they enter school. This was almost 60 years ago. And they started teaching academics and preschool learning and numbers and covers. And they found that when they taught these children these skills, or subsequently in grade 3, it made no difference. So what you'll really find is that this emphasis on rote learning and teaching skills for school development doesn't help. What really helps is what is called whole child development. And for a learning brain to take place, the entire ecosystem has to be in place. And what this means is that a child needs a safe space within the house, a space outside the house. You have to be physically healthy, you have to be well nourished, and then you have good parenting. And if all these ingredients are there, then the baby is really ready for learning. But unfortunately, according to UNICEF, in India, 45% of children are at low risk for poor outcome from learning because they are handicapped. So this is the building blocks. But you imagine the real life scenario. You find dysfunctional families, spaces around the house are not valid. Nutrition, for example, in India, 35% of the children are malnourished. Micronutrient deficiencies are common. Iron deficiency is seen in 60 to 65% of children. And we know very well that iron deficient children cannot learn. And this is such a remediable cause. Physical health is extremely important. Unless you are physically healthy, you can't learn. Physical health actually begins at birth. And if you find that almost 12% of babies in India are low birth weight because of improper management during pregnancy and malnutrition and other problems. So about 10 to 12% comes small for gestational age. So they born growth retarded at birth. Plus you have about 10% of babies who are premature. So you have almost 20% of babies who are handicapped. And if this is compounded by postnatal malnutrition, infection and poor environment, then it becomes a very difficult thing. If you see the infant mortality in India, it's about 2.6%. If you see the under 5 mortality, it is 4%. This is almost 20 times more than the developed countries. So if so many children are dying in our country, you can imagine the impact of chronic health in these patients. So you have malnutrition, you have physical illness, you have poor environment. And lastly, you have the parenting. Now, parenting, like we just discussed, all parents want to do the best, but you must have the mind space and the resources to do it. Unless you have a functional family, unless you have the economic resources, if you have domestic violence, you have substance abuse, you have mental health issues, then parents are unable to do it. So it's very important that we have to look at the whole global picture and the entire ecosystem. And that is why if you really want the country to prosper, you have to look at not individual families, but you have to also identify at-risk families. That who are the families who are at risk, and we have to reach out to them. Similarly, we have to reach out to children with disabilities, because 15 to 20% of children have some disabilities. Some of them are visible, but some of them are not invisible. So when it comes to policy and intervention, every school has to be inclusive. All countries have to cater to this large population of children. Only then can the outcomes be different.
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. And moving on to you, thank you so much for the fascinating keynote speech that you gave us at the beginning of the conference. Can you tell us a little bit more, building on what Dr. Mahesh has been talking about, how important play-based learning is in helping children develop those basic skills that will help them in terms of critical thinking going forward? And I think we'd be really interested to hear from your experience of working in several different countries around the world.
Yeah, I think, like it wouldn't come to a surprise to all of you when I say this, that play really builds the foundation for children to be what I would call self-regulated learners. So they learn to focus, to be resilient, to work with multiple ideas in mind, to communicate well, to play well with others, so that set of skills is developed. But the conditions need to be right. So I really appreciate what you just talked about, in the sense that, it made me realize that I come from such a privileged country where the conditions for children are right, although also in my part of the world there are children who grow up in quite challenging circumstances. But I think play is also a way through which children can develop those skills, because it's a space where you can grow your identity, where you can make choices, where you can feel safe, where you can develop those things at your own pace, alongside caring educators who are there to support you. But I think it also goes back to what I said earlier, and that's really our ability to acknowledge those competencies in children. This idea that children want to make sense of the world, they all do. All children across the world, whether they're born in the slums of India or at somewhere in Scandinavia or in New Zealand, they all want to make sense of their experience. It's part of who we are as people. And I really love that young children have that capacity, we all do, to create these kind of temporary, fluid explanations of what they encounter. And I'm drawing on the work now of Professor of Early Childhood Studies. Her name is Helen Hedges. And she talks about children as theory builders. Okay, so this idea of children as thinkers, children as researchers, children as theory builders speaks to this idea that we all give these kind of fluid, temporary explanations of the world. And those are a result of critical thinking. So for example, I remember at some point being part of a conversation where children were talking about what are good choices. And there was this boy who kept on talking about, well, you have to exercise and your heart starts beating faster. And then he said, and then you stop exercising and then your heart stops beating. And I was like, that's not completely the theory. But it is critical thinking. It is an explanation, right? And I think if we create a context within our school where children can tell us what they're thinking or show us through their drawings. I remember at some point having a conversation with children about their drawings, and we were thinking about where birds live. And they were drawing these beautiful, intricate drawings of what's inside a birdhouse. Like a little fridge and television and a bed. Just gorgeous, just gorgeous. So I think engaging with these ideas, listening to children also gives us a chance then to think, okay, what can we offer to children to support them to make more sense of this? And so, for example, if you think about this idea of when you stop exercising, your heart stops beating, this is actually something that we can inquire into. Right? If we try that with children and we listen to our heartbeat and we feel our heart, you notice that your heart starts beating slower and goes back to its original rate. So it is the listening and responding that helps us, that can help children to kind of expand their understanding of the world. So that's that critical thinking.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Shubhra, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing your insights from the decades of work that you've done in this area. As I think we've been talking about a lot today, if we really want to be able to impact ECCE at scale in India, we really do have to focus on how do we help strengthen the delivery of ECCE in the Anganwadis. Play-based learning is one aspect of that. We'd love to hear from you, from your experience. What are some of the key strategies that you feel will make a difference in terms of helping with professional development for Anganwadi workers?
Well, thank you. Having worked with the Anganwadi system for quite a few years, few strategies that have worked. And we have to work within certain constraints of time and finances. That is there. But I find that training in small bites help. Not to front load everything, just so that they get the gist of it, they get the main ideas, they go and practice. And in the initial days, then they go back from the training. It is very important that we go and provide hand-holding support to just transfer those learnings from theory to practice within their own context. That really helps them. As soon as they start tasting success and they see the benefits of it all, then they develop that urge to know more. And that is why we believe in recurrent trainings, in small doses, recurrent training, that is what we give. And then in the training, we try to keep it as experiential as possible. we try, wherever we go, to set up model Anganwadi centers near the training venue, so that they can go and see the live action. Because sometimes, oh, you are saying, but mere jagah nahi hota, it doesn't happen where I am. So when they see that happening, because the first thing is to be convinced about the change, the shift in practice, because they are conditioned by their own upbringing, their own ways of schooling. So that helps, going to actually, and then some reflection, and then videos do help. But the most important thing I find that is mentally. Somehow, I know it's a very large system, and having worked on a very large scale, we have come up with certain strategies of providing that mentor, because I think it's absolutely necessary. We have to do it.
And who does that mentorship come from? Is it peer-to-peer mentorship?
I didn't get it.
Who does the mentorship come from? Is it peer-to-peer mentorship?
Yeah, that will come slightly later on, but we try to train the supervisors, their immediate supervisors. See, when as an organization we go there to provide support, our team also provides that mentoring support, and also going with the supervisor to these visits, and how is mentoring to be offered, because that's not in our culture so much. It's more of monitoring, of finding faults and things like that. How you can do that? There are strategies that have worked.
Thank you.
But from within the system.
Arjun, in the Reliance Foundation programs, as we talked about, we are incorporating play-based learning as a key part of the program design of the work that we're doing with Anganwadis. Can you share a bit more on why it's so important, and what is the impact that you feel this will have?
I think one of the things in the program design itself is that how we put play at the center of everything, and I think the conference itself is a great example of how we are actually doing things instead of, yes, we're talking about it, but we get to see how the practice actually happens. And I think doing the play activities, it's a mindset thing. So for adults, like Shubhra ji also mentioned, that we have not grown up with play-based learning. So for us to break out of that, we need to become playful ourselves. So I think at one of the stations, conversation said that should we call it play-based learning, or should we just say play is learning, right? So I think in our program design, everything that we do, we want to embed play within it. So even our conversations with our teams, when we review something, there's playful elements within it. When we are doing orientation of supervisors, and I'll just give one example, and I'll speak in a little Hindi if that's okay. तो जब हम आंगनवाड़ी के साथ जब पहले काम करते हैं, सुपरवाइजर्स का हमने ओरिएंटेशन किया, तो ओरिएंटेशन में हम ये बताना चाहते थे कि आप अपने आंगनवाड़ी का विजन कैसे बनाएं, एक आंगनवाड़ी सेंटर, आपका खुद का केंद्र कैसा होना चाहिए। तो हमने ये नहीं बोला कि what are the features or what are the good characteristics of Anganwadi on a PowerPoint presentation. We gave building blocks and straws and shapes and said, अपना केंद्र बनाइए in a group. So that interaction led to many more insights about what the center could be in reality and given the context, compared to if we were to just have a conversation using bullet points. So I think that approach itself, when we are having conversations and using play as an element to start conversations as well with adults, is very critical. And that mindset, if we are able to shift in ourselves, and then also the teachers and also parents, like in the morning, Dr. Basu said, playful parents, playful teachers, playful communities. So I think that transition will take time, but we need to start with ourselves, and I think the program design, we sort of embed play in it.
Thanks, Arjun. Coming back to you, Dr. Mahesh, ECCE is pivotal in terms of laying those foundations for a child to be prepared for learning. Can you share your perspective with us on what are some of those basic requirements that need to be in place to prepare a child for learning?
The basic requirement, like we discussed, is it's going to be health, it's going to be good parenting and safe spaces. And if these children are then exposed to good learning, then they are going to thrive. One important aspect I'd like to emphasize is that when children are exposed to adverse circumstances, not only do they not get the positive input, but they get stress. And stress in child development is extremely important. And sometimes we think of stress only in terms of acute physical, emotional or sexual abuse. But the worst form of stress for children is chronic neglect. And this is when parents are not able to do what they are supposed to do. And children are chronically in a state of understimulation and not adequately engaged. And these children develop stress, and the effect of that continues over the period of their lifetime. So acute stress can come with difficulties in learning, behavior, emotion, and this is a flight or fight response, and it's largely mediated by cortisol, the stress hormone. But when you're neglected for a long time, then you have inflammation. And when you have inflammation, it affects the entire body system. So what happens in these children is they develop inflammation in the entire body, and subsequently they are at risk for depression, for cardiometabolic syndrome, they are at risk for diabetes, obesity, it changes the microbiome, and perhaps many other conditions. So they get a double whammy. Not only do they not get the positive input, but the stress of not getting it, like Viva's that film where the child doesn't get a response and the child is stressed. Imagine this going on for a lifetime or through the childhood. So there are negative consequences which have health impacts throughout life. So the stress is a very important aspect also.
So I think in the morning sessions as well, we also talked about the impact of COVID being one of the most stressful periods for everybody, but especially for parents as well. And one of the things that we have seen is that in the short term, it has really, it did result in a period of learning loss and child development, slowing down. Now we're several years later. Do you see recovery in that for children in that space?
So the impact of COVID is something which we have all anticipated because human beings are social animals and social skills, as we have discussed through the morning, mainly take place in the first 3 years of life. So it was anticipated that lack of social interaction and lack of education is going to have an impact. In my personal experience, the number of children with social deficits bordering on autism went up dramatically post-COVID. And many of these were not frank autism children, but they were just socially disconnected. And with therapy, they did improve. So this has impacted babies and children in a very major way. And the impact on learning is continuing. And in fact, it's going to continue for a few more years before it is rectified. Because like we discussed, the wiring is taking place, maximum in the first 3 years. If the positive wiring doesn't take place in all these domains, we are going to have its consequences over a period of time. The good part about the effect of stress, this was a major stress episode, is that babies and human beings are essentially resilient. And on the one side you have stressful factors, on the other side you have protective factors. But the good part is that with coaching and with relationships, it can reverse. The effort is more as you get older, the results are less complete as you get older, but this improvement can continue. So children are resilient and they do improve.
Thank you. Anna, again, we spoke in the morning about different types of innovative practices in play-based learning. And I think going back to what we were talking about, play is play. Are there different techniques in play-based learning from other countries that really stand out to you that you think we can learn from, or is there is it just very basically very similar in different countries and different settings?
Well, every setting is unique, of course, but I think the first thing I really want to kind of reiterate is this idea of teams finding joint understandings of what play-based learning means to them. And going back to the research, and for example, if you go along the lines, because there's many ways that you can qualify play, but if you go along the lines of free play, guided play, and structured play, building shared understandings of what that looks like in your context, and perhaps what that looks like for a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old is really crucial. And alongside this, being reflective and cognizant of how comfortable am I with the child's right to choose and the child's right to free play. Because I just want to make sure that, yes, play is learning. We went through a phase that we called it integrated learning, and then we were like, well, let's hope just play. But I think children have the right to choose. And so on this continuum, we also have to make sure that children still can make choices about what they're going to do, because that brings those high levels of engagement, and that helps with learning. So, but back to the innovative practices, I think one would be to find shared understandings, to go to the research, because there's many ways that we can qualify play. But some of the things that I've seen that I thought are really interesting is forest school, being in the forest all day long, all year long. Some schools would go maybe twice a week, but that idea of going out and being out and develop a relationship with nature alongside that obviously is a set of skills that children develop when they're young, I thought was really interesting. Beach school I've seen, amazing. The other thing that I'm quite interested in is this idea that we move away from this idea that school is a place where we have these different cells, right? And then there's the corridor, and that's our idea of what school is. But when we break away from that idea, then all of a sudden we can start thinking about ways that children have sometimes work in small groups and sometimes in bigger groups. So more of like an open space, free flow type of model, where there's just more possibilities to collaborate with other children, for adults to collaborate with each other, and perhaps a more sustainable use of resources. Because it means that we don't have to buy everything for one classroom, but we can actually share resources, which I think is a really powerful model. And the other thing that I really love, but that's for those of you that work in a context where there might be specialist teachers working with young children, is that instead of having the art teacher, the music teacher, and the PE teacher, there's actually one trusted adult that builds the relationship with children and then takes care of all these kind of elements of children's development. So again, we're working from the quality of the relationship rather than the sort of expertise that every person brings. So I quite like that, particularly in early childhood, because we know the relationships are so important.
Thank you, Anna. Dr. Shubhra, it would be great to hear a little bit more from you about some of the work that you've been doing to help strengthen parents' capacity to deliver play-based learning, especially in rural communities.
Yes. We have been working a lot with parents because if you want to make this shift to play-based learning, I think there is a mindset issue that we have to address, because play is considered waste of time, and being very blunt by many parents, and they feel that, so it is a very antithetical relationship between play and learning. So parents, and they do come and force Anganwadi workers. Why aren't you teaching? Why are you only playing? It's wasting time. See, look at that private school. They teach so much. So we have to work on that a bit. So for that, what we started doing was to give them simple activities that the pandemic strangely helped at that time, because there was no other option. So, and then, the parents came and they started saying things, in their own language, कि अब मेरी बच्ची, शांत होकर बैठती है, बातें सुनती है, पहले बहुत जिद करती थी, अभी जिद नहीं करती है. Things like that. We know as emotional regulation, or certain behavioral changes and communication changes in articulation, becoming more social. All these things they found, and then they started believing in us. So, and then once the Anganwadis reopened, we resumed with those sessions, and then we worked with the community, because the community larger also has an influence, the cultural values that are there in the community. So we, in Uttar Pradesh, we have these chopals, ECCE chopals we call them, and the entire, it is held at the heart of the village, and the entire village is invited, and there's a lot of fun, games, celebration of play, childhood, so that there is a common understanding on what learning is all about as well.
And do you also focus as part of your work, particularly on how do you get fathers more involved and more engaged?
Yes, we send them some videos or some pictures for activities. We deliberately put in pictures of fathers, of male members, of grandfathers, without directly saying, but and it has helped, and we have found that many fathers, they are getting more involved with daughters in certain communities where there is a lot of patriarchy. These are the welcome changes that we have seen there.
Thank you. Arjun, the work that we're doing in Reliance Foundation as well, there's a very strong focus on working together with community stakeholders. It'll be great to hear a bit more from you about the value and impact that that has.
Yeah, I'll pick on from what Shubhra ji just mentioned about the role of the communities. I think the larger societal context is very important. So when there is a fear of missing out, there are parental aspirations कि अच्छा वो बच्चा ये कर रहा है, वो स्कूल में ये हो रहा है. I'm again switching between Hindi and English. Okay, but why is my child not doing this? Why is my child not doing this? Because maybe through play something is happening, but it's not very visible compared to the other schools. So there is that fear of missing out, and there are aspirations in rural communities, in low-income communities, and there should be aspirations, but how do we work with them? So there are ways to influence. I think the larger influencers in the community are very important. The panchayat leaders, how do we take SHGs along? And it's not just towards their role in the infrastructure aspect. So for example, panchayats do have a role in enabling infrastructure. So for example, there's an Anganwadi center, but is there drinking water? Is there water connection? That's the role of the local community, the panchayat, or the urban body in an urban area. So those sort of things means that we have to reach out to a larger set of stakeholders. And I think the awareness part of it, from moving to awareness to practice at homes, if we want those things to happen in classrooms and homes, we need to have behavior change at a societal level, for the entire community, involve non-traditional stakeholders, one being fathers, the other being panchayats, in rural areas especially, so that they take leadership and take this forward.
Thanks, Arjun. So I think I'm just going to ask one final question to all of our panelists, bringing it back to the theme of our conference of Building Flourishing Futures. If you could share with us your one thought in terms of what you feel would make a difference to help us build flourishing futures for children through early childhood care and education. Anna, maybe we start with you? Your call to action. Or your aspiration.
My aspiration. Just the joy of being alongside children and watching them see these amazing things, I think, is really the joy of childhood, but also the joy for us. To see things through the eyes of a child is just a beautiful thing. And maybe it starts there, that deep appreciation of who children are and what they do and what they bring to the world. So that would be my call to action.
Dr. Mahesh?
As a medical person, I see two extremes. I would wish that the neglected babies and children would have better nurturing care and the parents would have a better infrastructure. And for the other extreme, I would wish that the helicopter parents would let their children be and let them play and let them learn the way they are supposed to and not be pressured by too many expectations.
As a person who started my career as a preschool educator, I used to teach children. I would like every child, irrespective of their background, to receive the best of education and enjoy their childhood and really grow up to be, the best human beings possible.
I think strengthening the Anganwadi system, public systems are very important in a country like ours. So strengthen public systems to deliver early childhood education to the last mile.
Thank you. So just a very big thank you to all of our panel, and to please join me.